Your database is not locked, and yet nothing is finishing.
The writes go in. The reads come back. No one is waiting on anyone.
And the table that fit comfortably on disk last week has grown by 90%, your fastest query has gone from 4 milliseconds to 600, and the on-call phone is going to ring at 2 in the morning.
Nothing is broken.
Every component is doing exactly what it was built to do. That combination, healthy parts and an unhealthy whole, is what makes this failure so expensive to find.
The bill arrives in a shape you will recognize.
You spend the morning reading query plans that are all correct.
You add one more index nobody needed. You restart the service, which helps for 20 minutes. Then somebody senior asks the question you cannot answer: why is a database with no lock contention slower than one drowning in it?
The hours are not the expensive part. The answer you do not have, in front of people whose trust you were still building, is the expensive part. So where did your disk go, and why does a system nobody is blocking behave worse than one everybody is blocking?
Hold that question.
The answer is the same mechanism that makes your reads fast in the first place, and once you can watch it working, a database that slows down while it is being scrupulously honest with you will never surprise you again.
The mechanism has a name 4 words long: Multi Version Concurrency Control.
Every word is load-bearing, so take them one at a time. Multi-version, more than one copy of the same row is alive at the same moment.
Concurrency, those copies exist precisely so that separate transactions can run without queuing behind each other. Control, something has to decide which copy each transaction is permitted to see.
Compress those 4 words into initials and you get MVCC, which is the form you will meet in release notes, and which by itself tells you nothing at all. Now the honest answer, and it is smaller than the jargon suggests.
So what does your database do when you update a row?
It does not change that row.
It writes a new copy and leaves the old one exactly where it was.
That is the entire idea. Every isolation level, every vacuum, every unexplained growth in disk usage, and every argument you have ever had with a colleague about read consistency falls out of that one decision.
Sounds impressive when it is called multi-version concurrency control. It is really just bookkeeping.
Note, those copies are not tucked away in a separate archive somewhere. In Postgres they sit in the same table, in the same pages, interleaved with the rows you think of as live, and each one carries 2 extra numbers in its header. One number records the transaction that created that version. The other records the transaction that deleted it, and stays empty while the version is current. 4 bytes each, and those 8 bytes are the whole visibility system.
Which means a delete, in this scheme, is not a removal. It is a write that fills in the second number.
Updating a row is not a change either, it is a delete of the old version and a creation of the new one, in one step.
What does that imply for a row you have updated 40 times?
41 versions of it, 40 of them waiting to be collected, all of them sitting in your table occupying space you are paying for.
Now for the part that earns the name. When a transaction starts, it takes a snapshot.
That snapshot is not a copy of your data, which is the thing most people assume. It is a short list, which transaction numbers had already committed at that instant. From then on the rule is mechanical, and you can hold all of it in your head. A version is visible to you if the transaction that created it committed before your snapshot, and if the transaction that deleted it either does not exist or had not committed before your snapshot.
That is the entire visibility rule. And where is the lock in it? There is no lock in it at all.
And that is why readers never block writers.
Your reporting query does not want the newest version of a row.
It wants the newest version that was committed before it began, and that version is one nobody is going to modify, because modifications create new copies instead of overwriting old ones.
Your writer is free to charge ahead. Your reader is looking at something frozen. Neither has to ask the other for permission, and both of them are correct at the same time. I find that arrangement quietly beautiful: 2 transactions, no negotiation, no waiting, both right.
It is worth sitting with how strange the bargain underneath it is.
The reason your reads are fast is that your database is deliberately wasting space.
It is hoarding out-of-date copies of your rows because throwing them away early would break somebody else's snapshot. The performance you enjoy is a direct consequence of the garbage you are storing.
How many engineers ever connect those two facts?
Most meet them years apart, in different incidents, and never once join them up.
So now the arithmetic, because this is where your disk actually went. Say your service updates 10,000 rows per second, and each version costs 200 bytes.
That is 2 million bytes of new versions every second, and it is fine, because the collector sweeps along behind you and reclaims anything no live snapshot could still see. Now open one transaction and leave it open. A dashboard. A migration. A session somebody forgot in a terminal window before lunch. Watch what that one forgotten transaction does. Its snapshot pins the horizon. The collector cannot reclaim any version newer than the oldest snapshot still running, because that transaction is entitled to see the world exactly as it was. So every version you create from that moment onward simply accumulates. 12 hours of that, at 10,000 rows per second, and you have written something like 400 million dead versions into a table nobody can shrink. Double the length of that transaction and you double the garbage. Double your write rate and you double it again. Which raises the question that matters more than the mechanism: how would you know this was happening, rather than guessing at it? You can check it with two numbers. Postgres will tell you the transaction number of the oldest snapshot still open, and it will tell you the dead row count for every table, and those two readings together are the diagnosis. If the oldest snapshot is hours old and the dead count is climbing, then no index and no restart is going to help you. End the transaction, and the collector catches up on its own. In practice, this failure almost never looks like a database problem. It looks like a slow dashboard, or a reporting replica, or one analytics tool whose default behavior is to open a transaction and hold it for the length of a report. So why is the diagnosis so slow? Because your writes stay fast, and nothing that stays fast gets investigated. The system that is degrading is not the system that is misbehaving, and nothing in your monitoring is built to say that out loud. Now scale the same problem past disk, because there is a harder limit underneath, and it is a beautiful piece of engineering pessimism. Those transaction numbers are 4 bytes wide, so eventually they run out and the counter wraps. A wrapped counter is not a performance problem, it is a correctness catastrophe. A transaction from the distant past would suddenly look like one from the future, and your visibility rule would start hiding rows that plainly exist. So what does a database do when honesty and availability collide? It refuses. Somewhere around 2 billion transactions ahead of the wrap it begins shouting in your log, and at the very end it stops accepting writes altogether rather than lie to you about what your data is. Caveat: refusing your writes sounds drastic, and it is the kindest of the available options. Watch what the alternatives chose. Oracle keeps its old versions in a separate undo area of fixed size, and when a long-running reader asks for a version that has already been overwritten, Oracle does not block the writer and does not keep the garbage. It fails the reader, with an error message that has been confusing people for decades: snapshot too old. Same problem, opposite answer. One system pays in disk, the other pays in failed queries, and neither one blocks. InnoDB, underneath MySQL, splits the difference again. Old versions live in the undo log, a purge thread walks along behind your transactions removing whatever nobody can see, and the queue of unpurged history has a name and a number you can read at any time. When that number climbs into the millions, you are watching the same disease wearing different symptoms: slower reads, because reconstructing an old version means walking a chain of undo records, 1 hop per version. 10 hops is nothing. 10,000 hops on every row your query touches? That is your afternoon gone. Notice the pattern across all three. Does anybody escape the cost? No, they only choose where to put it. Postgres puts it in your table and trusts the collector to keep up. Oracle puts it in a fixed area and fails readers when it overflows. InnoDB puts it in a chain and charges you per hop at read time. That is what an engineering trade-off looks like once you strip the marketing off it: identical physics, 3 different invoices, and your job is knowing which one arrives on your desk. Now the harder question, and it separates people who have read about this from people who have been bitten by it. Is a snapshot enough to keep your data correct? Reads never block, writes never block, and everybody sees a consistent moment in time. That sounds like the end of the story. But that is not the end of the story, and the gap has a name. 2 transactions start at the same instant. Both read the same 2 rows. Each one checks a rule that involves both rows, sees the rule still holds, and then modifies a different row. Neither transaction touched the row the other one wrote, so nothing conflicts and both commit happily. And the rule is now broken, because each decision was made against a snapshot in which the other change had not happened yet. The textbook case is the on-call rota: 2 doctors both check that somebody else is still on duty, both sign off, and now nobody is. That anomaly is called write skew, and it was pinned down in a 1995 paper that took apart the isolation levels the standard had defined. Bernstein was one of the authors. Their conclusion was uncomfortable and correct: snapshot isolation is not serializable.
So why did the standard miss it?
The committee wrote down the anomalies it had seen, then stopped looking. It prevents every anomaly the standard listed, and permits one the standard never mentioned, which is a fine reminder that a specification is evidence about what its authors thought of, not proof about what can happen to you.
Note, this is fixable, and the fix is the nerdiest thing here.
Postgres implements serializable snapshot isolation, which keeps the no-blocking property and adds a monitor watching for the particular pattern of read and write dependencies that could form a cycle.
When it finds one, it does not lock anything. It either lets you commit, or it aborts you and tells you to try again. Optimism with an auditor.
The price is that your application must be able to retry cleanly, perhaps 3 times before it gives up, which a great many applications quietly cannot. So how would you falsify any of this on your own machine, in about 10 minutes?
Open 2 sessions against a database you do not care about. Create 1 table with 2 rows.
In each session, begin a transaction at the strictest level your database offers, read both rows, and then have each session update the row the other one did not touch.
Commit both.
If both commits succeed and your invariant is broken, you have reproduced write skew on your own hardware. If one commit is rejected, you have reproduced the detector instead.
Either way, you now know, rather than believe. Here is where the received wisdom gets thin, and I would rather admit that than pretend otherwise. How long should your version retention window be?
Newer distributed systems, CockroachDB among them, keep versions by timestamp and expire them after a configured window, 25 hours by default.
Choose a short window and your long reports fail. Choose a generous one and your storage grows while your scans get slower.
The right value depends on your workload, and there is no principled formula for it that I have ever seen defended with real data.
So what window is right for your system? The honest answer is that nobody knows.
It is folklore, tuned incident by incident, and anybody telling you the default is correct for your system is guessing with confidence.
So what do you actually do with this on Monday morning? 3 things, and only 3.
First, find the oldest open transaction in your production database right now, and find out what opens it, because there is almost certainly one you do not know about. Second, put a hard limit on how long any transaction is allowed to live, 5 minutes rather than 5 hours, and enforce it in the database rather than in a code review. Third, measure your dead version count over time instead of your disk usage, because dead versions climb before disk does, and the earlier number is the one that gives you any warning at all. The unglamorous truth is that most of the operational pain blamed on this design comes down to one habit: transactions left open while something slow happens outside the database.
A network call. A person thinking.
A batch job that reads 2 million rows and then waits on a file.
Your open transaction is a promise to the collector that you still need to see the past, and every second you hold that promise, the past gets more expensive for everybody to keep. So, back to the opening question. Where did your disk go, and why was a database nobody was blocking slower than one everybody was blocking? The space went into versions that were still legally visible to a transaction somebody left open, and the slowness came from every reader walking longer and longer chains of those versions to reach the one it was allowed to see. No lock ever appeared, because no lock was ever needed.
The cost moved from waiting to remembering, and remembering does not show up on any of the graphs you were staring at.
Which leaves you with a judgment I cannot make on your behalf.
Every database you will ever run has picked a place to put this cost, and not one of them removed it. Your job is to find out which invoice your system is paying and whether you can still afford it under load, not to find the vendor that got it right. When somebody tells you their database has no locking, the interesting follow-up is not whether that is true. It is where they put the garbage, and who pays for it.
2 questions to sit with, and both are about your system rather than mine. Ask yourself both of these, the answers are your call, not mine. What is the longest transaction your production database saw this week, and do you know what opened it? And if a reader in your system suddenly needed a version of a row from 12 hours ago, would your database serve it, fail it, or quietly make everybody else pay for keeping it? Find out rather than guess. The measurement is cheaper than the incident.